The glass hit the marble floor before anyone understood what had happened. Not dropped, thrown. There was a difference, and everyone in that lobby felt it. Kezia Osei-Drummond did not flinch. She stood at the entrance of the Hartwell Gallery, one of the oldest private art institutions in Toronto. The kind of building that had its own Wikipedia page and a donor wall that hadn't been updated since 1987, and she watched the shards of champagne flute scatter across the floor like something had been decided. She had not thrown the glass. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. It had been nudged from the tray she was holding, or rather, from the tray she had reflexively picked up when a server stumbled near her, and the nudge had come from a shoulder that didn't apologize, a shoulder wrapped in navy cashmere, attached to a woman who was already 3 steps away and hadn't looked back. That was how it started. Not with a shove, not with a scene, just a glass, a shoulder, and the particular silence that follows when a room decides whether or not to notice something. Kezia set the tray down on the nearest surface, a side table, mahogany, probably older than she was. She was 29 years old. She was wearing a dress that had taken her 40 minutes to decide on. Deep burgundy, structured at the shoulder, the kind of thing her mother would have called boardroom beautiful. She had driven 2 hours from Waterloo to be here. She had a ticket. She had, in fact, more than a ticket. But none of that was visible from the outside. From the outside, she was a young black woman standing alone at the entrance of a gala full of people who already knew each other, holding nothing now but her own small clutch, while a server crouched nearby to collect the broken glass and a man in a headset watched her from across the room. He started walking toward her. His name was Terence Voss. She would learn this later, and he was the Hartwell's event coordinator, which meant he was responsible for everything that happened inside these doors tonight, and he intended to keep it that way. He was not a rude man, exactly. He was efficient. There was a difference, and it mattered less than it should have. "Ma'am." He stopped 2 feet from her. "Can I help you find something?" "I'm here for the gala," Kezia said. "Are you with one of the catering teams?" She looked at him. "The kitchen entrance," he said, without blinking, "is around the back. I can have someone walk you." "I have an invitation," she said. He paused. The pause was short, a fraction of a second, but it was the kind of pause that contained an entire opinion. "Of course," he said. "Could I see it?" She opened her clutch. She handed him the card. It was cream-colored, embossed, the kind of invitation the Hartwell sent to its foundation circle. The 47 individuals and organizations, whose annual contributions kept the lights on, and the collection insured and the endowment growing at a rate that allowed the board to sleep well. She had received it by courier 3 weeks ago, addressed to her full name, which was Kezia Osei-Drummond, and beneath the name, in smaller type, Founder, Greystone Capital Partners. Terence looked at the card. He looked at her. He looked at the card again. "One moment," he said, and walked away. She did not move. She had learned, a long time ago, that the worst thing you could do in a moment like this was to seem like you were waiting to be dismissed. So she didn't wait. She simply stood, and she looked at the room, and she let the room figure out what to do with that. The Hartwell's main gallery was extraordinary, if you could see it past the people. 30-foot ceilings. A Lauren Harris landscape above the East Bar that Kezia had loved since she was 12 years old, and her father had brought her here on a Saturday afternoon and told her to look at it until she felt something. She had felt something. She still did. The room was full tonight. 300 people. Maybe more. The kind of crowd that gathered when art and money agreed to be in the same room. Collectors, board members, a scattering of politicians and media figures whose presence was more ornamental than substantive. Tables with white linens. A string quartet in the corner playing something Kezia couldn't quite identify. A podium at the far end with the Hartwell crest, and behind it a banner that read, "Reimagining the Collection." A new wing for a new era. The new wing. The one that had been announced 8 months ago. The one that was going to cost $12 million and take 2 years to build. and would finally give the Hartwell the contemporary gallery space it had needed for a decade. The one that Kezia's firm had committed $4 million to fund. She had not told many people about that. It wasn't her style to announce things. You either did the work or you didn't. The plaques would come later. She said she's with catering. The voice came from behind her, low enough to be a murmur, but not low enough to be private. Kezia turned slightly. Two women, mid-50s, standing near the coat check. One of them was the navy cashmere shoulder. She was talking to the other without looking at Kezia, but the angle was deliberate. The words were meant to land. Honestly, the second woman said, they really should have a separate entrance. This happens every time. Every time. The first one agreed. The first woman's name was Osei-Drummond Fitch. Kezia also learned this later. She was a legacy donor. Her family had sat on the Hartwell board for 2 years, and she was, by any reasonable measure, a significant person in this room. She chaired the acquisitions subcommittee. She had opinions about everything and stated them with the confidence of someone who had never once been asked to reconsider. Her daughter, Annalise Drummond Fitch, was standing 3 feet behind her, watching the whole thing with the particular stillness of someone who wanted to say something and had decided not to. Terence returned. He was moving faster now. He had presumably checked the list. Mrs. Osei-Drummond, he said, and the name came out carefully, like he was placing something fragile on a shelf. I apologize for the delay. You're absolutely on the list. Please come in. Thank you, Kezia said. She walked into the room. She did not look at Heloise. She did not need to. But here is what you should know about Kezia Osei-Drummond, because the rest of this story makes no sense without it. She had grown up in Scarborough. Her parents had come to Canada from Ghana in 1987 with $40, 2 suitcases, and a particular stubbornness that her father described as optimism, and her mother described as refusing to believe what people tell you about yourself. Her father had driven a taxi for 11 years before he owned it. Her mother had worked at a dry cleaner for 7 years before she managed it. By the time Kezia was in high school, they owned 3 locations. She had gone to University of Waterloo on a scholarship, mathematics. She had graduated in 3.5 years. She had worked at a mid-sized asset management firm in Kitchener until she was 24, at which point she had left to start Greystone with 2 colleagues, a converted garage space, and what her colleagues' garage described as either a genius instinct or a death wish. 5 years later, Greystone managed just under $200 million in assets. Their model, patient, long horizon, focused on undervalued cultural and civic infrastructure, was not glamorous, but it was right, and it had made their clients very comfortable. Kezia did not talk about this at parties. She did not have a publicist. She had a LinkedIn profile she updated maybe twice a year and a firm website that had been designed by a friend and was slightly out of date. She dressed well because she believed in dressing well, but she did not wear her net worth on her body. This, she understood, was a problem for Saint-Bou. Specifically, it was a problem for people who had decided, before she opened her mouth, what category she belonged to, and who found it genuinely inconvenient when the category turned out to be wrong. She took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and found a spot near the Harris painting. She looked at it for a long moment. Lake Superior, the cold light, the way the land held itself at the edge of the water. She felt something. She still did. A man appeared beside her. His name was Elliot Crane. Late 60s, silver-haired. The kind of person who wore a blazer to his own home. And he was the Hartwell's executive director. And he was also the person who had spent 14 months courting Greystone's investment, sitting in that Waterloo conference room with the bad coffee and the whiteboard that always had someone else's diagrams on it, making the case for what this new wing could mean. Kezia, he said. Elliot, she said. I heard there was some confusion at the door. There wasn't, she said. Everything was fine. He looked at her with the careful expression of a man who knew perfectly well that everything was not fine, but also understood that she had chosen her ground. "We're very glad you're here," he said. "I know," she said. "Show me the architectural drawings again. I want to see the light study for the North Gallery." He smiled. He had a good smile. They moved through the room together. She did not see Heloise for another 40 minutes. When she did, it was because Heloise saw her first. Specifically, saw her standing with Elliot and the board chair, Dr. Ingrid Falconer, and two members of the architectural firm in what was clearly not a catering conversation. Heloise's expression did not change. That was the thing about people like Heloise. The expression almost never changed. But the posture did, a slight recalibration, a pulling in. Annalise was still there, still watching. The evening moved on. There was dinner, there were speeches. The board chair spoke about vision and legacy, and the responsibility of those who had benefited from this city to give something lasting back to it. Elliot spoke about the collection, about the artists who had never had proper space, about what it meant to say that a culture was valued, and then actually back that claim with resources. There was applause. It was genuine, mostly. Then came the donor recognition segment. This was the part Kezia had quietly dreaded. She didn't love being named in rooms. But Elliot had been clear that the Foundation's circle donors would be acknowledged, and she had agreed, because she understood that visibility mattered. That when people saw who was investing in these institutions, it changed something. It shifted something, even if only slightly. "Our founding partner for the new wing," Elliot said from the podium, whose commitment of $4 million made this project possible to even imagine. Kezia Osei-Drummond, founder of Greystone Capital Partners. The room applauded. Kezia stood. She nodded once. She did not give a speech. She sat back down. But she was watching Heloise's table. She couldn't help it, and what she saw was this. Heloise, mid-clap, stopping. Her hands still for a moment, then the clapping resuming, slower, and the face doing that thing it did, not changing, exactly, but recalibrating. Processing, $4 million. The woman she had told to use the back entrance. After dinner, there was a reception near the south wing. And this was where it happened. Kezia was standing with a small group. Elliot, Dr. Falconer, and a sculptor named Obinna Achike, whose work was being considered for the new wing. When Heloise approached, she came directly, which Kezia appreciated. At least she wasn't a coward about it. "I want to introduce myself properly," Heloise said. She extended her hand. "Heloise Drummond Fitch. I've been on the acquisition subcommittee for 12 years. I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot earlier." Kezia shook her hand. "Kezia Osei-Drummond." "Yes," Heloise said. "I know." There was a silence, the kind that asks something of everyone present. "My family has a long history with this institution," Heloise said. "We've given quite a lot over the years." "I know," Kezia said. "The East Reading Room." Heloise blinked. "Yes, that's right. Your mother dedicated it in 1994. I was at an event here recently and I saw the plaque." Another silence. Heloise was reassessing again. Kezia could see it happening in real time. The whole architecture of the interaction was shifting, and Heloise was trying to find her footing. "Well," Heloise said, "I hope you'll be an active presence. The subcommittee can always use new perspectives." "I've been asked to join the board," Kezia said. "I'll be at the March meeting." Heloise nodded. Once. She excused herself. Elliot appeared at Kezia's shoulder approximately 4 seconds later. "That was," he said, "something to watch." "It was fine," Kezia said. "You keep saying that. Because it is. But this is where it stopped being fine. Because Heloise, walking away, turned to say something to a woman beside her. A friend or a colleague. Kezia didn't know, and the something she said carried. The way sound carries in a room with 30-foot ceilings and marble floors, the way it always carries when you most wish it wouldn't. "They gave her the board seat," Heloise said. "I suppose that's what 4 million buys these days." The friend laughed. Small, polished. The laugh of a person who knew better and did it anyway. Kezia heard it. Everyone nearby heard it. Annalise Drummond Fitch, standing 6 feet away, went very still, and Obinna Achike, the sculptor, set down his glass and said, quietly but clearly, To no one in particular. Interesting place to say something like that. The room had heard. The room was doing that thing rooms do. A slight contraction, a held breath. The collective recalibration of 300 people deciding whether this was a moment or just a sound. Kezia did not raise her voice. She did not cross the room. She did not do anything that could be described as a scene. She simply stayed where she was, and she let the silence do what silence does when it's telling the truth. It beside her said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then, "I'll be speaking to the board about committee appointments. I want you to know that." "I know," Kezia said. "She's been on the subcommittee a long time. I know that too. It doesn't mean." "Elliot," Kezia said. "I'm aware of what it does and doesn't mean. I've been aware my entire career." She turned to look at him. "I'm still here." He nodded. Slowly. She turned back to Obina. "Tell me more about the North Gallery installation. The one with the suspended elements." He looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled. "Right," he said. "So the idea is that the pieces hang at varying heights, and the viewer moves through them at eye level. So you're never above or below the work. You're always inside it." "I like that," she said. They talked for another 20 minutes. The evening wound down. Coats were retrieved. Cars were called. The Harris landscape stayed where it was, serene and absolute, holding its light. 3 days later, the Hartwell's board received a letter from Osei-Drummond Fitch requesting that the Foundation Circle recognition structure be reviewed for equity and transparency. The letter was carefully worded. It did not mention Kezia by name. It did not need to. Everyone on the board understood exactly what it was. Dr. Falconer forwarded it to Kezia with a single line. "Wanted you to see this. Call me." Kezia read it once. She set down her phone. She looked out the window at the Waterloo streetscape. Mid-January. Gray. The kind of cold that has opinions. And she thought about her father in a taxi at 6 in the morning. Driving through weather exactly like this, refusing to believe what people told him about himself. She picked up the phone. "Ingrid," she said. "Yes. I've read it. Here's what I think we should do." What followed was not a war. Kezia didn't do wars. What followed was a process, and processes were her native language. She joined the board in March, as scheduled. She was the youngest member and the only black woman. She was also, as it turned out, the only member with a background in institutional finance. Which meant that when the endowment committee met in April and looked at their 3-year projections and began to understand that the numbers were not, in fact, as comfortable as everyone had assumed, Kezia was the one who asked the questions nobody had thought to ask. She asked them without drama. Questions. When you have read all the documents and run your own numbers and you simply want to know if everyone else in the room is looking at the same thing you're looking at. They were not. The endowment had been managed by the same firm for 16 years. The firm was good. It was also, in Kezia's assessment, about 14 months behind the current environment. Not negligent. Just slow. And slow, at this particular moment, with interest rate movements doing what they were doing, and the Hartwell's liquidity needs about to increase significantly because of the new wing, was going to be a problem. She laid this out in a 12-page memo. She sent it to Dr. Falconer and to the Finance Subcommittee. She suggested 3 options. She offered to present them. She presented them in June. By September, the Hartwell had restructured its endowment management, not through Greystone. She had been explicit that there should be no conflict of interest, and she had recused herself from that decision entirely, but through a process she had designed, and the new firm they chose was sharper and more responsive, and the projections improved. At the September board meeting, Dr. Falconer said in her opening remarks, "We owe significant thanks to Kezia Osei-Drummond, whose financial expertise this year has substantially strengthened our position heading into the construction phase." The room applauded. Heloise was not in the room. She had resigned from the acquisition subcommittee in July, citing personal scheduling conflicts. Her letter had been gracious. Her exit had been quiet. These things sometimes ended quietly, and that was fine. The point was never the ending. The point was the work, Annalise Drummond-Fitch had come to the March board meeting as a guest. She had introduced herself to Kezia afterward, briefly, near the coat rack in the main hallway. "I want to apologize," Annalise said. "For the gala, for how you were treated." "You weren't the one who treated me that way," Kezia said. "I know, but I watched it happen and I didn't say anything." Kezia looked at her. "Why are you telling me now?" Annalise was quiet for a moment. "Because I've been thinking about it for 4 months. And I think I've been in a lot of rooms in my life where I watched something happen and told myself it wasn't my place to say anything. And I'm trying to be different about that." Kezia considered this. "Okay," she said. "That's a reasonable thing to be working on. I thought maybe I could get involved. Volunteer, or the education program is looking for people," Kezia said. "School groups, Saturday sessions. They work with kids from across the city." Annalise nodded. "I'll call." "Good," Kezia said. She meant it. The new wing broke ground the following spring. It was a clear morning, mid-April. The kind of day Toronto produces maybe 7 times a year. Cold enough to feel clean. Bright enough to make the city look like it meant it. Kezia stood with the other donors and board members and watched a ceremonial shovel turn the first earth, and she thought, "This is the part nobody photographs. Not the shovel. Not the dirt. The standing there. The having stayed." A reporter from a local arts publication found her afterward and asked how she felt about the project. "It's a long time coming," she said. "You've been one of the driving forces," the reporter said. "The financial leadership, the board work. People are talking about you as someone who's reshaping how this institution thinks." "I hope so," Kezia said. "That's the job." "Any message for the next generation? Young women, especially, who want to be in these spaces?" Kezia thought about this for a moment. A real moment, not a performed one. She thought about her father. She thought about the Harris painting. She thought about a glass hitting a marble floor and a shoulder that didn't look back. "Show up," she said. "Not to prove something. Just show up because you're supposed to be there. And then do the work. The work is the argument. It always was." The reporter wrote it down. Inside the gallery, the Harris painting caught the morning light through the clerestory windows, that same cold radiance, that same northern patience, and it did not move, and it did not need to, because some things hold their light regardless of who is watching.